So what is the difference between Trump and Obama related to South Asian policy?
Well, the difference is, of course, Obama was thoughtful. Obama tried to understand things. And where Obama, I think, really failed was that Obama was too easily bowled over by the military. He did not lead with his own understanding of the problem, which was, I can assure you, Obama understood that Pakistan was the problem. Once you understand that Pakistan's the problem, within the constraints of our system, it's not clear what the solution is. President Trump doesn't care about any of this. You know, President Trump doesn't really know that much about the region. He hasn't bothered to educate himself. Much of his policy is driven by impulse, and sometimes he'll tweet something that the government tries to roll back. Sometimes he'll tweet something that the government tries to effectuate. But anyone who knows him knows that he has no patience. And I think this has been a problem with all of our presidents. We've never had a strategy in Afghanistan. We've had strategies that have played out over 6 months, right? And so you'll never know if any of those strategies could have worked because no one had the strategic patience to see it through. So President Trump is perhaps even a bigger culprit in that regard. He came out saying, you know, we were never going to give Pakistan anything. We're not going to reward them for undermining our interests. But the irony is he's giving them the biggest reward of all, which is handing Afghan policy back to them.
So India wants stable government in Afghanistan because stable government in Afghanistan controls Pakistan. Is it possible?
So first of all, I'm not sure that's what India wants, because India would not want a stable Afghanistan that's in the hands of the Taliban, right? I mean, you had a stable Afghanistan from circa 1994 up until the U.S. invasion. And that stability produced a lot of bad things for India, right? You had a variety of militant training camps, and those militants operated in India. We had the hijacking of the Air India flight from Kathmandu that landed in Kandahar and gave rise to Jaish-e-Mohammed. So I don't think it's true that that's only what India wants. What India wants is an Afghanistan that does not allow terrorist groups into the country that affect India. And I don't see how a stable Afghanistan returning to the Taliban meets that criteria. And I think India also wants an Afghan government that is sympathetic to India's interests in the region, right? What India has always tried to do is try to balance the role of Pakistan in Afghanistan, right? India does not want Afghanistan to become a Pakistan proxy, right? So how do you get something, and by the way, you know, this is something that the United States and Iran has always wanted. You know, the United States, India, and Iran have much more in common than the United States has with Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, right? We're basically going back to this old formula, which is United States, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, when the most natural partnership should be India, Iran, and the United States, right?
So behind the screen there is attempt. Taliban are also stakeholders in Afghanistan. What is the repercussions this attempt?
So this is not like, for example, when Al-Qaeda was in Iraq, Al-Qaeda was not indigenous to Iraq. The Al-Qaeda fighters tended to not be Iraqi, right? So when you have a foreign fighter in your country, you can eliminate them through the gun, you can arrest them, and you can deport them. Taliban were never like this, right? The Taliban, they are Afghans. They're not going anywhere. They're very numerous. The ethnic group that supports them is very numerous, which means that you can't, you know, with the Tamil Tigers, when the Sri Lankan government defeated the Tamil Tigers, they just massacred everyone, right? You can't do that with the Taliban. They're too numerous, and certainly the Americans can't do it because it's a war crime, right? And that's not the kind of army that we are. So you are never going to be able to murder your way through this. But it would have been nice had we been in a position to militarily defeat them. That was never going to happen. And I've been talking about this war now since the beginning. We were never going to win with Pakistan as our partner, right? So the center of gravity of the war was always in Pakistan, right? Yet we fought it in Afghanistan while appeasing Pakistan, right? So there was never going to be any other outcome than this. So it's sort of like you just run on a treadmill and then you're surprised that you haven't gone anywhere. This has been a giant, bloody, expensive treadmill.
Do you think that Lashkar-e-Toiba has within a Pakistan domestic landscape?
What do you mean?
No, they are the Lashkar-e-Toiba. They are part of the Pakistan.
Oh yes. Well, so Lashkar is very different from, say, the Islamic State or Lashkar-e-Jungvi. Jamaat al-Dawa, which is how Pakistanis refer to the organization domestically, is actually, believe it or not, anti-violent within Pakistan. They've never conducted a single operation within Pakistan. They have even issued declarations in support of Hindus and their temples within Pakistan. For Hindus and other non-Muslim minorities in Pakistan, they only counsel tabligh and dawah and basically conversion, to convert them. And so you'll see in Sindh, where you have many Hindus living, they've never killed a Hindu, they've never attacked a temple, they've done none of that stuff. Others have done it, like Lashkar-e-Jungvi, and so sometimes people confuse the two Lashkars, but they've never done it. In fact, what they do is they build wells, because Sindh is where the Hindus live, there's a massive drought. And they're also very poor because they're massively discriminated against in Pakistan. So they actually target Hindu communities with public service and outreach. Now, this of course is in stark contrast to what they do outside of Pakistan, right? And in fact, this is their ethos. Their ethos is that we have to wage jihad outside of Pakistan to keep Pakistan safe, right? So in other words, it's like you don't use if you're sleeping in a tent, you don't pee in your own tent, right? You don't soil your own home. And so this makes them a very important tool for the Pakistani state, because they only kill where they're told to kill, and domestically they are a force for stability in a country that needs a force for stability. So you will see the Pakistani government deploying Jamaat al-Dawa everywhere where there's domestic instability. Like, for example, in Balochistan, you also see them being deployed against the PTM, not deployed violently, but to try and persuade them that countering the state is not what a good Muslim does.
So this war on terror yield any results? This is related to Al-Qaeda or any other terror organizations?
So that's a hard question, because you have to ask yourself, what is the outcome that we were looking for, right? The outcome was to destroy Al-Qaeda. We kind of did, right? But it produced ISIS. And that was directly tied to the invasion of Iraq, the disbanding of the Iraqi army, and de-Baathification, right? Had George W. Bush not invaded Iraq, we can say definitively there would be no ISIS. So is the world a better place now? I don't know. We spend a lot of money, your country, my country, we spend a lot of money fighting so-called terrorism. And that money could have been spent educating people. I mean, my country's infrastructure is terrible. We could have spent that money on healthcare. We could have spent that money on education. We could have spent that money in myriad ways. So I'm not sure that we are safer. I think we as democracies are much more fearful. The idea of ISIS conducting the terror attacks that they've done in Europe, ISIS has produced the biggest refugee crisis in Europe. In some sense, this has fueled the right wing, right? So it's a hard question because when you think about all of the negative externalities, I think it's harder to say that we're safer. I think if we could learn lessons from this, I think what the Americans really should have done, and I said it at the time, but I was young and had no influence. If we could go back and redo everything that we did on September 12th, I think we would have been much better served trying to negotiate with the Taliban to get them to hand over Osama bin Laden. I think we would have been much better served had we used a law enforcement approach. But we now know, the more we know about Vice President Dick Cheney, it was always a plan to invade Iraq, always. So I don't think with that particular vice president, in his understanding of his role and the relationship that he had with George W., that any other outcome was possible. But I don't think we're safer. I don't think we feel safer. And I think we, even more dangerously, more than ever, we fear Muslims. We've criminalized being Muslim. And we are afraid of women in burqas. We're afraid of men in skull caps. Your average American who never had an opinion about Muslims before all of this now fear Muslims. Right.
So there is any change after the recent the new government in the Pakistan?
No. And you shouldn't expect it because the Prime Minister doesn't control anything that matters. It's all in the army. So there's always this optimism here, and I think you have to be optimistic because you live next to this terrible neighbor, right? If you didn't have optimism, what would you have? But don't think that just because you have this, cricketer and you've got a couple of cricketers here that go over and they like each other from their old cricketing days, that's going to change. It's not going to change. And in fact, if I were an Indian, and I've said this very clearly, I would be very wary of any prime minister offering peace because you can really set your watch by it. Whenever your prime minister has gone to Pakistan or vice versa, they've worn matching vests as they walk down some gully and have remembrances of some time past. There's always a terror attack. And I personally think, and I don't usually offer advice about what India should or shouldn't do, I personally think that this Kartarpur corridor is a terrible idea. What I've seen with Lashkar is that they've been trying to forge ties with Khalistanis. The ISI has been trying to revivify the Khalistan movement. There have been Khalistani attacks, and you have a massive drug problem in the Punjab. I think that is the last thing India needs is this Kartarpur corridor. I never give advice like this, but this is something I'm utterly shocked by.
You know that Arab Spring, the post-Arab Spring, bring any change in political and life of the people?
So I only work on South Asia. The only reason I'll speak to Iraq is that I've done work in Iraq from my previous days, and because I study ISIS. But I can't speak to the Arab Spring. I don't speak Arabic. I don't travel to those countries, so I can't answer those questions, and so I don't want to try.